Good morning, all. We are so sorry for the delay. We had some technology issues, which just seems to be par for the course during this year of 2020. So we're going to give it just a minute to everyone's live and has joined the live broadcast, and then we will get started. So thank you for your patience and bear with us for about 1 minute while we try and make sure everyone's on. All right, I think it slowed down. Oh, no. All right. I think we're pretty much ready to go based on the numbers settling out. So good morning, I'm Jenny Matthews. I'm the 2020 president of the Southwest Ohio chapter of the International Society for Certified Employee Benefits, or ISCEBS. This session is nearing the end of our 12-month education series on an introduction to employee benefits. Next month we have group disability plans. And then the session from April that we didn't pivot in time to go ahead and move to webinar status was voluntary benefits, and we will possibly bump that to August if the timing works out. So thanks for taking your time. And again, I apologize for the little bit of the delay there. We had a couple of technology issues to work out. Before we begin, I'd like to point out a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. Everyone is automatically muted upon joining. And if you have any questions at all during the session, those in the Q&A feature, and the Chart-Snyder reps are monitoring that and they can try and get to those when it makes sense. If you have any really specific questions about how COBRA works on your employee benefit plan at your employer, we recommend that you contact your COBRA administrator, because different TPAs do handle things a little differently, and a particular answer may depend on your specific employer situation. So I think that makes sense. There are 2 handouts that Chart-Snyder is going to mention. I will send those around later today after I get the attendee list, so that you have those to review on your own. And at the very end of the presentation, I will also share the SHRM activity code. So hang with me as we wrap up the questions, and then I will get that code out there. So we did have a change in speakers. I apologize, it was part of the issue that we had. So I'm going to introduce several people from Chart-Snyder, administrators, and they are located in Mason, Ohio, but handle COBRA administration for employers around the country. Alli Buis is the Benefit Continuation Services Administration Team Manager. She's been an integral part of supporting the administration and customer service teams at Chart-Snyder. She started 8 years ago as an administration assistant. She's been promoted over the years to the customer service team manager, and most recently to the administration team manager position. As part of Alli's new role, she is managing COBRA administrators and assisting with clients. She graduated from Muskingum College. We also have Cara Maxwell, who is the Benefit Administration Department Training Lead at Chart-Snyder. And then we also have Barb Yearout, who is the president of Chart-Snyder here in Ohio. I also wanted to point out that I actually worked with Alli for a number of years when I was at Chart-Snyder, and I know exactly how knowledgeable she is. Pleased to introduce her to walk us all through COBRA administration. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chart-Snyder.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining this morning. I really appreciate it. As you can see, we did have a bit of a change, so thank you for bearing with us this morning. Cara has graciously stepped in to be my partner in crime and getting through this presentation. So just a quick overview on what we do at Snyder. So we manage several different things for our clients, offer all of these lines of service, savings and spending accounts, for your active employee needs, FSA, HSA, HRA, and commuter benefits. The benefit continuation department handles COBRA, retiree, direct billing, and other billing. That is what we're here to talk about today. The plan document services are wrap documents, plan-specific documents, things of that sort. And then we also do FMLA leave administration. So that is a very brief version of what we do here at Snyder. So today's discussion is on COBRA Administration. So the things we're going to touch on today are what is COBRA, who is required to offer COBRA, identifying qualified beneficiaries, duration and termination of COBRA notices and election rules, the cost of COBRA to participants, penalties for noncompliance, open and special enrollments, and eligible benefits. Of course, the elephant in the room is COVID-19 and how it has impacted these. So we will touch on that just a little bit today. We won't go too into depth as there are different interpretations of the legislation, but we will touch on that briefly as well today. So we're going to jump right in with what is COBRA. So abbreviated, COBRA is the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. COBRA coverage applies to employers with 20 or more employees. Churches are exempt. Temporary continuation of health coverage, it's on a self-pay basis, meaning that as an active employee, one of the benefits of being an employee is that your employer pays a big portion of those benefits for you. You pay a smaller portion, as your employee contribution that comes out of your paycheck. It covers coverage loss due to specific qualifying events, and many states have their own continuation laws for insured health plans. So this talks about who is required to offer COBRA, which we just mentioned. It applies to group health plans maintained by employers with 20 or more employees. Small employers with fewer than 20 employees are exempt, although they may be subject to state continuation laws. And the employer must have had fewer than 20 employees on at least 50% of typical business days in the previous calendar year. And to apply the small employer exception, that means if they had more than 20 employees on more than 50% of those days, they do have to offer COBRA for the next plan year. The calculation applies to the entire calendar year and does not change if the number of employees goes up or down. We get that question very often. Even if they drop below that 20 employees mid-year, they are going off of last year's calculation. So the employees that must be counted in that calculation are all common law employees, not just plan participants. So that means every active employee is a head count for that number, and full and part-time employees both count in that calculation, although part-time employees count as a fraction of a full-time employee. Health plans maintained by churches are exempt from COBRA as well. Qualifying for the church exemption, the health plan must be maintained by a church or a convention or association of churches that meets certain tax requirements. Often involves a detailed analysis of the organization's activities and their religious affiliation, and under some circumstances, organizations that are not churches, for example, certain hospitals or schools may qualify for the exemption. We do actually have clients that we administer for who are not required to offer COBRA, but they do offer a continuation plan because they are a larger plan, and we definitely help with those services as well. Sometimes they follow COBRA laws almost to a T, and they change the amount of time that is offered for COBRA. That is because, again, they're exempt from having to offer COBRA, but they choose to offer those plans to their employees as they have large group plans. I'm going to turn it over to Cara for a couple of slides.
Okay, so when we're talking about offering COBRA, it's important to recognize who we're going to be offering COBRA to. So a COBRA qualifying event, we'll call them QEs throughout, qualifying events, will trigger an offer of COBRA to qualified beneficiaries. We'll call them QBs throughout. So who is a qualified beneficiary? Typically, that's going to be someone that was covered on the plan immediately prior to the qualifying event. Where you have to be a little careful with the COBRA is the domestic partner situation. Domestic partners are not covered under COBRA. What you could have as a potential pitfall due to that is if you offer COBRA to a domestic partner and then they elect COBRA benefits, and the carrier comes back and they say, this is a domestic partner, we can't put them on COBRA benefits. You have to deal with the follow-up from that. So that's a potential pitfall with the domestic partner. We also, I flipped, I'm sorry. If you offered COBRA to a, not offering COBRA to a QB, you know, missing that, you're going to have compliance issues further down the road if you fail to offer COBRA to, oh, this person only wanted COBRA for employee only, but the spouse was covered, and then we skip the spouse. That could be a pitfall. You want to make sure that you're offering it to everyone that was covered immediately prior to the event. So this is just, again, going into a little bit further detail about who the specific qualified beneficiaries are. So we talked about the covered employee, we talked about the employee spouse, and how it does not include domestic partners. It's also going to be the dependent's children. And also, if you have anyone, if one of the qualified beneficiaries has a child or they adopt a child, they'll be considered a qualified beneficiary as well. And something important to note, with each qualified beneficiary, they are individually able to elect COBRA. So just the spouse could decide to elect COBRA benefits, even though they don't have the employee on the plan anymore. Maybe the employee doesn't want COBRA, but the spouse could elect, or the spouse and the children. Any one of those qualified beneficiaries outlined here is independently able to elect COBRA benefits.
Thanks, Karen. Something I want to mention on that we run into fairly frequently is questions around how the plan continues when just a spouse or just a child elects the COBRA or a certain subset of the family. And what we often get into is questions around, does my deductible carry over? That is a plan-specific question that we typically try not to advise on. So you just have to be careful about those things and making sure that you're giving the participants all the information up front, that they understand that if only a spouse continues, that their deductible may reset at that point. Just have to be very cautious in that situation, that we don't get into that level of detail, and we let the carrier really handle that as they are the plan expert. So the next set of slides is around timing of COBRA. So this is the duration of COBRA. The maximum coverage periods are a couple of different things. So 18 months for termination of employment and reduction in hours, as well as 36 months for divorce, death, and loss of dependent status. Those can be extended, or COBRA can be extended in some circumstances up to 36 months. For example, if there was a second qualifying event after the first and they get the full 36 months of coverage, one of those other qualifying events after the first 18. So for example, if a child is on their parent's plan and they 18 months, eligible for 18 months initially because mom or dad was terminated for employment, then the child turns 26 and ages off the plan, then they're eligible for a full 36 months of coverage, so that first 18 and then the 36. It can be terminated early for certain reasons. I want to quickly pause and just mention that we are aware that there are a lot of questions in regards to furloughs because that is going on right now. And a furlough in itself is not a qualifying event because employers handle furloughs differently. So a furlough can be considered a qualifying event if the employer turns off benefits, and in that case, it's truly a termination of employment, even if they're planning to hire the employee back. There are some circumstances which ChartSnyder has seen a lot of recently in the new COVID world that we're living in, where employers are furloughing their employees, but they're leaving their benefits active. We have even have some circumstances where they've asked us to bill their employees for their benefits during this time, so that they can either pay them while they are laid off. Of course, that is then post-tax, and they're taking care of those benefits, or in some circumstances, personally, my husband was furloughed and we had to repay his benefits once he started back to work. So there's lots of different ways that a furlough can work, and it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's a qualifying event. So you have to take that on a case-by-case basis. So there are a few ways to extend coverage, which was briefly touched on in the last slide. So there is the case of a disability extension. This is when the Social Security Administration deems you disabled and you receive an award letter for that disability. Your 18 months of coverage then extends to 29 months. You get an additional 11 months in the event of you're deemed disabled. A second qualifying event is when the coverage extends to 32 months. That was the event that I just spoke about a moment ago. If a dependent loses coverage because they age off the plan, or if there is a death of employee or a divorce, any of those will extend you that additional 18-month period. And then Medicare entitlement. In certain circumstances, spouses and children can get additional 18 months of coverage if all criteria are met. Without getting into too much detail here, it has to be a plan-specific setting that if employees lose coverage when they turn 65, then the spouses and children can get that additional time. But it's a plan specific, and we always refer to the plan administrator in those cases. So COBRA generally terminates at the end of the maximum coverage period, which we just addressed on the last couple of slides. No notice to the qualified beneficiary is required when it expires. There is typically an expiration notice sent out before the COBRA expires, but there's no notice required when it terminates for expiration. A notice is required to qualified beneficiaries when COBRA terminates early. So the reasons COBRA may terminate early is if the qualified beneficiary fails to make a timely payment, which we'll go over those guidelines here shortly. If the employer ceases to make any group health plan available to any employee. I'm going to pause here. We have questions about this often when a employer is maybe acquired by another company. They still do have to continue that COBRA. Their eligibility, or those participants are still eligible for COBRA as long as there is a group health plan offered to the active employees of that company. So if they're taken over by another company, the COBRA participants would be required to take that on, to be eligible for those benefits through that company. The only time this is going to come into effect where they cease to make a group health plan available is if the company shuts its doors, completely closes down, and there's no active employees or no benefits. We have had that happen before, and it is a bit of a headache, but we help those participants as much as we can through that situation. Qualified beneficiary.
Sorry, Alli, if I can jump in there, I'll just make a comment that this is something that comes up suddenly sometimes, and it really should be addressed in the due diligence of the acquisition or the merger of what's going to happen to that. Is the current health plan still going to exist because that company isn't completely being acquired, maybe just a division is being acquired, or it just really depends on the real specifics of that acquisition? Is it a stock sale? Is it an asset sale? Things like that. So this gets very, very complex based on the individual situation, but it sometimes gets forgotten of who's currently on COBRA and what's going to happen to them, what's going to happen to the people who don't go over to that new company, so they lose their coverage. There's just a lot of things, a lot of different situations that can come up. And I think the attorneys dealing with the overall due diligence of the acquisition or the merger sometimes don't really get into the weeds on this. And then all of a sudden there's all these questions that come up and no one's really prepared to answer them. So it's just a complex situation when it happens.
Most definitely. Thank you, Jenny. The next situation where COBRA may terminate early is if the qualified beneficiary becomes entitled to Medicare after the COBRA election. Once you become entitled to Medicare, COBRA is no longer available to you. A disabled qualified beneficiary is determined to no longer be disabled. It is the participant's responsibility to notify us in that circumstance. And for cause, that is things such as fraud. If the participant, elected under false pretenses, excuse me. So the next section is on the notices that are required for COBRA administration. We're going to go through these notices one by one, but the 4 notices that we have listed here are the initial rights notice, the COBRA election notice, the notice of unavailability, and the notice of early termination. And I will get into those details on each slide. So the initial rights notice provides information to the plan participants regarding COBRA and plan procedures. They must be provided within 90 days after the plan coverage begins and may be provided in a summary plan description. A single notice can be used for employee and spouse at the same address, and model notices are available. So we do send these for our clients. Some clients tend to err on the side of caution, and they send initial notices to their employees at time of hire. That way they don't have to track who's received an initial notice and who has not at any point. And that is, again, that is over the top and definitely not needed, but I understand the why behind. What the requirement is when someone elects that coverage. When an employer sends it at time of hire, they send it so that they don't, again, have to track if someone elects at open enrollment or if there is a plan change at open enrollment, anything like that. That takes care of that requirement. The election notice gives qualified beneficiaries information about rights and obligations regarding their specific qualifying event. If the employer is administering the COBRA plan, the notice must be provided within 44 days of the qualifying event or coverage loss, whichever is later. So that 44 days includes a couple of different time periods. It includes 30 days that the employer has to notify if someone else is administering the plan. They have 30 days to notify the plan administrator. And then the plan administrator must then provide must provide the notice within 14 days of that. That makes up that calculation of 44 days. There is also a model notice available for that. One COVID note on this one. COVID-19, again, has changed some of those dates and the regulation that was recently put out, the joint regulation. So these dates have been extended, and we'll talk about that extension date and how long the employers do have towards the end of the call. But there is a longer period of time for which employers have to supply that information to their employees. So the third notice we have here is the notice of unavailability. Plan administrator must notify an individual with explanation of why he or she is not entitled to COBRA coverage. The circumstances where we see this is if the qualified beneficiary did not experience a qualifying event, they did not provide information timely, or that the QB did not provide complete information. And then a notice of early termination, which we see these very, very often. The plan administrator must notify a qualified beneficiary when COBRA terminates before the end of their maximum coverage period. The notice must be provided as soon as possible, and the required information is the reason for early termination and the date for which the coverage will terminate. Again, we talked about this before, but that can be for something like non-payment, or the employee may have received other group health coverage through a new employer potentially. We do send notices out for those as well. So how much does COBRA cost to the participants? As a customer service manager, this is one of the things I talked about a lot on escalated calls. The maximum premium cannot exceed 102% of the cost to the active employee's premium. So what that 102% is made up of is, again, the employer, when an employee was active, the employer paid a big portion of the premium on their behalf as a benefit. The employee paid the remaining portion to make up the 100%, and then the 2% is an administrative fee that can be collected by whoever's administering the COBRA plan. Disability extension, it significantly increases the fee. Qualified beneficiaries receiving the disability extension may be charged up to 150% of the plan's total cost of coverage. This is something that we don't always necessarily share the why behind with COBRA participants, but when someone is on a disability extension, it often drives up the amount of claims that the plan can incur. That 50% fee helps cover some of that in that extension time frame. And then premium increases. So COBRA can, premiums can increase at the same time as active employees have their open enrollment. Those plans costs may increase. We all know how that works. And the COBRA participants would be eligible for that increase just like the active employees would. And then payment procedures. So qualified beneficiaries must pay their COBRA premiums on a timely basis. They must provide at least 45 days for administrators, must provide at least 45 days for their initial payment. And then they also must provide a 30-day grace period for other payments ongoing. Late payments, then the administrator is allowed to terminate coverage after that grace period has been passed. Then, of course, they must send that early termination notice. And there are some special rules around premium shortfalls that are typically built into your administration system. Again, I'm just going to point out that the COVID-19, the new regulations, have extended those deadlines for payment, and we will go into that when we talk about our handout later on. Okay.
So I'll take this part, Allie. Consequences of COBRA mistakes. It's kind of circling back when we were talking about the qualified beneficiaries and potential pitfalls. This is some of the consequences that you could see if you fail to offer COBRA to qualified beneficiaries. The IRS could excise taxes. ERISA, you could see $110 a day statutory penalties. The participant could decide, oh, I never got my COBRA notice, and decide to take legal action against that. Either that COBRA notice, the initial rights, or the election form. Both are required to be sent, or at least to have been sent in the SPD, as Alli had indicated. Adverse selection and inability to terminate coverage. That could be an example of, if you didn't offer COBRA, maybe you couldn't terminate the you didn't terminate the active employee coverage when you termed the qualified beneficiary. It could be difficult to go back and try and change that term date. For any of these mistakes, we would definitely advise you consulting with an attorney to help. And Alli, I don't know if you want to add anything to that in terms of storyline, but it's always best to consult with your individual attorney if there is something going on and you feel like you've missed one of these COBRA marks.
for sure. And as a COBRA administrator ourselves, we do tend to help our clients, stay on track and make sure that they're meeting all of those deadlines and things like that to avoid these. And we also have, our compliance department that is at the ready anytime something like this comes up. But one of the things we always run into, and it'll probably come up on the next slide, but even if you are late offering a qualifying event, drop what you're doing and offer it immediately. The time stops ticking, your clock stops as soon as you offer that qualifying event, even if it's late or one of those other things. And then, you minimize your risk at that point as soon as you offer it. So,
Alli, can I throw in there? I had a situation when I was working at Chart in sales where the employer had thought they had COBRA Administration signed up through the carrier, and they had completed the form to set up the COBRA, faxed it over at the time, back in the old days, to their broker to get the COBRA Administration set up when they moved the medical to that new carrier. And it turned out, like a year later, it comes out that the COBRA had never gotten set up with the medical carrier. So anybody who had termed or all of these requirements, nobody was doing anything on them. So the employer was on the hook for all of these notices, and had anyone wanted to take COBRA and they had not been offered it and had no chance to take it, so it put them on the hook. And the other thing that you have to consider, it's not just about, oh, well, we'll send out the COBRA notices now and catch anyone up. And the other thing is, if it goes too long, too many months, you also need to check with the carrier, the health carrier or the dental or the vision, because they typically have time frames of going back and letting someone back onto coverage for an administrative mistake, maybe 60 days, 90 days, usually at the most. So we actually had to help them go to their carriers and work that out, that if they sent these notices out to say, hey, an employee that no longer works for us, you had a right to take COBRA and we're offering it to you now, and you can retro back to the date of termination or the loss of coverage. We also had to get carriers to agree that they would accept that risk back onto the plan. And if that doesn't happen, the carrier is under no obligation to do that, then the employer would be left liable for any of those claims that occurred if somebody does take the COBRA at that point, retro back, and that's a potential large situation, liability that it's not just a matter of sending them out late and being done with it. So there's a lot that goes on behind that, that I think sometimes employers don't really understand of the consequence of not getting these out on time.
Absolutely. And that's something that, goes into underwriting at that point. And really having a third-party administrator, unfortunately, in the situation Jenny was talking about, it was the carrier that was to be offering COBRA, but having a third-party administrator often alleviates some of that risk for the employer, as they're, at least at Chart Snyder, we're monitoring how often we're getting those qualifying events and making sure that things are coming through, and getting that out for you timely. But absolutely, that's something that we've definitely run into before and had to deal with, helping the employer through getting all the information to underwriting at the carrier level and hoping that they can turn it on retroactively for them.
We talked about, the legality and the things that could go wrong and the consequences, but there are also some pitfalls within the administration piece itself. Earlier, we talked about domestic partners. We had added in here qualified child medical support orders. So that could be a child that's an adult, maybe they're over the age of 26 and they're supposed to stay on, they were a qualified beneficiary. Where you get the loss of dependent status, a lot of people think that just because an adult has turned 26 and they should be kicked off the plan. Sometimes there are qualified child medical support orders where they have to stay on over the age of 65. Over the age of 26. Jenny was really clear about talking about the mergers and acquisitions. So you have to watch for all those and ask the questions too. You know, is the plan staying active? What is going to happen with the people that are on COBRA? Do we have to move them over or do we not? Jenny, I don't think I could summarize it better than you did earlier here. We also have a leave of absence. So you could see someone going on a leave of absence and then maybe they kept their active employee benefits and then at some point they hit that leave of absence where maybe they aren't, you know, they're still not working and they lose their benefits, maybe they exhausted their FMLA. That could be an example of a reduction in hours COBRA qualifying event. So you have to kind of watch those people that are on the leave of absence, try to track their coverage. Alli, you talked a little bit about Medicare entitlement. Specifically, it has to do with when you become Medicare entitled will determine how your COBRA plan is going to behave. If you are on COBRA benefits and you turn 65, that's it. You know, your COBRA is, you're done as of the age of 65 and enrolling in Medicare. So Medicare entitlement would then be defined as both eligible for and enrolled in Medicare. So that would be your Medicare entitlement date. That is what we're going to use when we are calculating Medicare. You could also have special severance arrangements. We have, especially with COVID, we've seen clients decide that they want to pay the employer portion of the COBRA premium for a certain number of months. So you are able to offset the cost that you're invoicing to the participant based on a subsidy that the employer could decide to provide. Alli, would you add, subtract, and I think I might have saw something pop through the Q&A.
Yep, that's what I was going to jump to. We got a question about what the algorithm is for the TPA to determine if an employer is sending out notices timely. It's not necessarily an algorithm. It's typically built into your platform, and that is, again, one of the benefits of using a TPA is the system is set up to let you know if you are offering COBRA out of date, if it's outside of the 30 days, you know, since the qualifying event. Our system, at least our platform, lets us know that, hey, this is outside of the 30 days. Do you want to go ahead and offer it? At that point, it's a flag for us to go look at that and say, hey, is this, you know, just 30 days old or is it a year old? You know, and then we can consult the client about things like that. In addition, when we're receiving these types of files, you know, or qualifying events from our clients, we run audits. Again, as a TPA, we run audits to make sure that we're receiving information from a client. And if we're not receiving information from a client as frequently as expected, then we would reach out to that client. It would show up in an audit and we'd reach out to that client and say, hey, we're not receiving any of this information for you. That just came up recently. We run these monthly and sometimes quarterly audits depending on what the audit is. And it came up recently where we had to reach out and the client wasn't aware that their administrator, their platform that they were using was no longer sending us qualifying event files and initial notice files. So that's one of those benefits to having a TPA in place to help administer this for you. Thank you for the question. All right.
The next subject we have are your open enrollment or your special enrollment notes. We have listed right here at the top that the COBRA plans are subject to the same changes made by the employer to similarly situated non-COBRA participants. And we got hung up a little bit on the word similarly situated, but you know, use the example of you have an employee and they're enrolled in division AB. There's Alli's initials there. And that employee is going to be subject to the same changes made to their plan within that division while they're on COBRA. So when you're looking at that similarly situated active employee, that's what that's talking about. If that division is changing their benefits, then the COBRA participants are also going to be subject to those changes. They are also entitled to be offered an open enrollment period, just like the active employees are. And they are also allowed to make changes during that open enrollment period or add dependents. to that plan, with of course the exception of the FSA plan, because the FSA plan is only good through the end of their planned year. So that is a question that we'll get sometimes from clients is, you know, this person did not have their spouse on their plan when they were an active employee. Now you're telling me to enroll them. And the answer is yes, we are, because under COBRA, they are allowed to add their spouse during open enrollment or any dependent. And then the special enrollment would be if an immediate family member or you experience a special enrollment life qualifying event. So that's your birth, marriage, adoption, anything that could allow your spouse or child to come on your plan when you were an active employee. You're going to see that pretty similarly tracked while you're on COBRA. The same regulations that and timeframes that your active plan has to add someone at the time of marriage, birth, or adoption, they're going to be mirrored exactly the same when you're on the COBRA benefits. So you're following the same rules of the plan while you're on COBRA. And we talked, I think, a little bit on the last slide about what an eligible benefit is, because we had mentioned FSAs. It's important to note that all of these over here listed in gray are plans that are subject to COBRA. So COBRA applies to any group health plan that is maintained by the employer. And your key question when you're trying to determine if the plan is eligible or not is, does it provide medical care? Does it have to do with their overall health and wellness? So we have the example here of your medical, dental, vision, prescription. You also have HRAs and FSAs. Those plans are eligible for COBRA. How we calculate their rate, and I think I can add that in here. When you're calculating like the rate for your HRA or your FSA, your HRA is going to be, it's really, you should get in touch with your HRA administrator to determine what's the best way. Is it bundled with the medical plan? So it comes to them at no cost. Or are you going to charge a plan utilization rate to the COBRA participant? So maybe they could elect the medical plan without the HRA, and if they're electing the HRA, they have to pay a utilization rate. So working that through with your HRA administrator will be helpful. I know for Chart Snyder, when we administer the HRA, that's a question that we will ask is, do you want us to calculate the utilization rate and add that in for the COBRA premium? We also have your health flexible spending account. So people will ask FSAs, and I'm going to talk about plans ineligible benefits on the next tab, but these are your health flexible spending accounts. Those are eligible based on the employee's, based on the employee's balance at the time of termination. If they have contributed more than they've spent from their FSA, then that FSA is eligible for COBRA. But if they have spent more than they contributed and they have a negative balance in their FSA, that plan will not be eligible for COBRA. And again, that's something that we will go and find out if we administer the FSA at Chart Snyder, as we'll pull the balance information to determine their COBRA eligibility once we receive notice they're on the FSA. We also have wellness programs that provide medical care, and the EAP plans, that one can sometimes sneak by. Sometimes it is bundled in with your medical coverage, but sometimes there is a standalone cost, and you want to make sure that you're offering that plan separate with its associated cost if you're offering COBRA. And then that kind of ties back into what then isn't eligible for COBRA. You have your health savings accounts, your HSAs, and as many are familiar with your HSA account, that is your money that you take with you. You can, what's the right word for it, Alli? It's on the tip of my tongue. You can convert it to an individual. Is that the word we use for that?
It's just
it's okay
because it's owned by the employee already.
There you go. That's the word for it.
Yeah.
So it goes with them. I got stuck for a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no need to COBRA it because it's already the employee's money to do with what they want under their own account.
Right. And the only difference is the employer is no longer making contributions to it. You also have your long-term care plans, AD&D, long-term and short-term disability plans. So people will sometimes say, oh, they have these benefits, I should offer COBRA for them. And the answer is no. It was not here, but when we're talking about flexible savings accounts, you're not going to add in the transportation reimbursement savings account or your dependent care account. Both of those do not provide health care, so those plans are not eligible for COBRA. And then down here at the bottom, we tried to pull out specifically, canceling a plan does not always end COBRA responsibility. If the employer continues to provide any group health plan, the obligation to provide COBRA coverage continues. So what this could mean is maybe during, and you can correct me anywhere here, Alli, but if you're offering a medical plan and maybe the medical plan that the employee was on is no longer available, you have to offer those COBRA participants a medical plan, and you just give them the option through either open enrollment or special enrollment to enroll in that medical plan that you are continuing to maintain.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay. All right. So we have, I guess I should first ask if there are any outstanding questions. I don't know if you have the ability to unmute yourselves or if you want to submit anything through the Q&A now while we're walking through the couple of handouts we have for you. I think we only have, let's see, a couple of minutes left. It looks like we have about 4 minutes. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to send those through the Q&A or unmute yourself. And in the meantime, we'll go ahead and look at those handouts. Cara, I can either share, or if you have those up, you can share them.
If you have, I'd have to open them up. So if you have them all.
I have them up. So if you will discontinue sharing. And I'm getting a note that you are unable to unmute yourselves. So I apologize. If you have any questions, feel free to send those through the Q&A. So I will get this first handout pulled up. And the first handout we're going to send you away with, can you folks see that handout? Cara, can we see it?
I can see it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So the first handout that we have for you is one of the Chart-Snyder standby items that I would say people from management down to customer service have these pinned in their desk. It is really a quick view of the COBRA process and all of the timelines around it. Again, this does not include all of our new fun COVID grace periods and timelines, but this is the standard timeline, and we are sending you away with this. Again, it's just a really quick reference for how long each of the time periods last and how long employers and TPAs alike have to send out COBRA notices to participants. So that's the first handout that we have for you today. And I'm going to share the other item now, which is, we recently, again, have all been dealing with the new joint regulation between the IRS and the DOL in regards to COVID-19. So what I'm sharing now on my screen is Chart-Snyder's operational FAQ for our employers. Now, what I want to note is that the DOL came back after our first kind of look at this administration and said that there were 3 different scenarios that would be permissible in this to administer these new changes. The option that Chart-Snyder has chosen to go with is basically continuing on administration as usual, but we are giving the plan participants the option to use those extended grace periods and extended time periods for election. And I'll go through those really quickly because we have just another minute. But this is the administration plan that Chart-Snyder has gone with. And just, I'm sure everyone's aware, but the timelines that are affected have all been extended by 60 days after the end of the COVID-19 national emergency, which of course is yet to be determined when that end date will be. But the timelines that are affected by that in regards to COBRA only are the date a group health plan or sponsor or administrator has to provide a COBRA election notice to participants, the 60-day election period for COBRA continuation of coverage, the date for making COBRA continuation coverage payments, the date individuals have to notify a health plan of a qualifying event or disability, and special health plan enrollment periods, for example, marriage, birth, or adoption. So all of those time periods have been extended until 60 days after the end of the national emergency. So we have just some questions that employers had in mind, that we were frequently getting asked. So those are all on that handout there, and how we are handling communication to our participants as well. So you folks will take that away today as well. I'm just going to check the Q&A one more time before we wrap up here.
There was one question that came through, Alli, and the question was, our FSA is for dental and vision expenses. Does this qualify for the health FSA COBRA continuation requirement? And my answer back to that was yes. Since the dental and vision are subject to COBRA, then this FSA will be subject to COBRA as well.
Absolutely. And I think that just about wraps things up, Jenny.
All right, thank you all. Great information. The COBRA is pretty complex, and there's always very specific situations that it's really hard to address as an overall type of session. So again, that's where going back to your own COBRA administrator and asking them how they handle something is very, very important. And then also thinking through, do you need to get your permission or approval to do something as well in those situations? So great information. I do have the SHRM code for this event. If anyone needs it, it is activity 20-2GYUN. If anyone needs the actual certificate, please email me at Jenny, jenny.matthews@marshmma.com. And my email address is also out on the event invitation out on our CEBS website. Feel free to reach out to me. I will be sending out those 2 attachments that Chart Snyder is providing after I get the attendee list. So I will get that out there as well. Don't forget, we will be posting our group disability plans webinar in the next week or so for July. And then we will also bump out the voluntary benefits class that was supposed to be in April. So more education opportunities to come.
And speaking of education opportunities, Jenny, I almost forgot to mention that Chart Snyder will be offering an upcoming webinar focused solely on the COBRA legislative updates featuring Darcy Heitzman, an employee benefits attorney. Watch for on Chart Snyder's COVID-19 page on our website for more details, and that's char-snyder.com, and we have a COVID-19 page. So check that out if you're interested in the COBRA updates featuring Darcy Heitzman.
Perfect. Well, Alli and Cara, thank you all so much. I know we had a little stress at the beginning, but you all did great, and thanks for hanging in there and perseverance. That's what it takes. So technology always seems to throw us for a loop, but thank you all for your time. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out to me afterwards. And if there's anything we can do to answer any other questions that come up, we will be happy to do that. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.